Well, I'm here today with Michele Dennis from Haileybury, and she is the leader of digital learning. Is that correct?
Yeah, my team's the digital learning team. My title is, for anyone who works in technology, the vaguest title ever, head of digital, which, given that everything is a little bit digital nowadays, I like to think of it as being head of everything. Um, but no, it is really head of digital. While my title says head of digital, I oversee the digital learning area of Haileybury.
Yeah. There is so much so many new titles these days. Just go through, all my connections on LinkedIn, and there was head of digital learning, head of digital something else, digital pedagogy, learning technologies, so many. Yeah, it's just continuing to evolve. It's hard to keep up with these days. But
Yeah, look, I've never cared about a title. Like for me, it's always been like, I'll just do the job. Just get me, when I'm hired, I will go about and make technology for me used to further learning. And I do think that when you look at these roles, it depends on who's in it. So how I go about it with my particular expertise might be very different to someone who's coming from a library background or someone who's coming from a more or an English background. So I think that's why the titles are so changeable because the job changes a lot depending on who's sitting in the seat.
you're probably right there, I'd say. And also because of yeah, you could possibly say, the ever-changing, technological development, something coming up. Who knows, in 10 years will be the head of AI and education. Who knows, the subtitle. Who knows what will happen.
Look, and
um
other people have said the opposite. I think it's Lauren Sayer who says, like, it shouldn't be digital learning, it should just be learning. Digital is just an aspect of it. So it could even be that the technology completely disappears because from the title because it is just part of what being a good school is. You never know. Could go the other way.
that's correct. That's absolutely true, Michelle. That's absolutely true. Listen, thank you so much for this opportunity to get to meet you and to discuss uh, what you're doing at Haileybury, and to share your expertise and knowledge. It really is, my pleasure and pleasure and privilege to meet you, and to learn from what you know. So thank you for today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I do think that having my role is a privilege, and so one of the things I do want to do is make sure that I share all of our learnings and the things that we're doing so that other schools that maybe don't have specialists to lean on can at least get access to the ideas that are happening out and hopefully spread that around.
Well, let's start. How long have you been at Haileybury for, and how long have you been in this role for?
This is my third year in the role. In Haileybury years, it seems more like 7, but 3 human years. There's a lot that goes on. So during the last 3 years, we went from being in lockdown to running bimodal classes to launching an online school. And while we're at it, changing LMS in Darwin at the moment, and expanding the online school to add another state in there. So, like, it's been a busy 3 years.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure it's just blown by, as it always does. Um, so, looking at Haileybury as a school, as a K-12 school, I've always thought that, believed really that for effective and successful technology integration to occur in the classroom, in any sector of education. There needs to really be, a foundation laid. What are some examples can you give about, what early childhood teachers can do, to get the groundworks done, in terms of integrating technology?
I'm blown away by the early learning at Haileybury. I'm lucky enough to be able to pop into some of the early learning centres, and I ran a STEM in early learning session for them last year. And the thing that I'm really in awe of is that, we tend to, I'm secondary trained. We tend to think that education starts when the kids enter school on that first day of school with their backpack on and that. But the ELCs they're already learning phonics. They're already learning to count. There's play and there's playful learning. But it's definitely learning. And so I think if we do things right with the use of technology in those ELCs, what we can do is bring in technology, and that's some of the things that we've been able to do. Things like the B-bots and that can be used as toys, as well as teaching things like how to give instructions, beginning building blocks for programming and algorithms later, directions, and building that into place so that, I'm very passionate about getting more girls into technology because I do think that technology is forming a future society, and unless we have equal representation, not just for women, but for all sorts of different groups, then the world we create might not be fair for all of those groups, or as good as it could be. And I think ELC is a great chance for us to not only start those thinkings that we can then grow on when we're teaching programming in the junior years, but also start breaking those stereotypes as early as possible. So like technology then gets seen as a tool that's for everyone, that is part of your play just as much as using physical Lego bricks can be. I do think screen time is really important. I think that we need to be very, very mindful of child development and what technology works best when, and that different screen time is of different value. So like making sure that when students in ELC are using screens, that it's it is things that are adding value, like you don't just do anything on an iPad, for example. iPad is one part of many different rotations that they can do within the ELC classroom. But when they're doing it, we're picking apps that we know will help them grow. And if we do all that right, then by the time we get to prep, we're ready then to start really building on those foundations and the attitudes of you can make a mistake, that, it's very hard to do anything too bad with technology. Most things are fixable. That kind of problem solving and risk taking attitude is really, really important. And then from there, we can keep on growing with that.
Okay. So the early child curriculum is is really closely, strongly connected to the Australian curriculum. How can, early childhood teachers then prepare young children, for the primary curriculum, which is, a bit more expansive in the technology use?
I think that we need to make sure that we are aware of age and stage and what's appropriate at ELC. So you don't want to take the primary curriculum, push it too far down. But in terms of preparation, some of it is about learning when to use technology as a tool. and when not to. Part of it is learning, making sure that students learn those good habits about technology, that technology is I do believe technology is a privilege and that we need to treat it with respect. Like those kind of attitudes towards technology are really important to develop early. But also that idea that technology is a tool that's created by humans. It may feel like magic, it's not magic. You could do it. And I think that if you have those basic core ideas there with technology, then you're really setting a good foundation then to build on that as they grow up through the school. So I do think that, you know, if you look at things that we're often doing with BBOTs in those preps and grade 1 classes, I think a lot of that we can even move a little bit earlier down into the ELC curriculum. The problem is we have kids who go to a whole lot of different ELCs across the state, and at the moment their experience will vary depending on which one they go to, and often we just have to catch everyone up. I'd love to see more consistency in that so that we can, when they come to primary school, we're a little bit more confident that they've all had certain experiences and opportunities.
Yeah. So then um, how can primary teachers then pick up on what early childhood teachers have sort of finished off with in terms of technology integration? How can they continue progression and continuity in that sort of area?
So in an ideal world, so we're very lucky to be K to 12, so we can have those conversations upwards and downwards and do that shared planning. So that you can scope and sequence it and have that natural progression. Makes it a lot easier to go, okay, so this is what they've done. This is how we continue that story and keep our messages consistent. That's not always possible. So if you're in a primary school without that that feeder coming in, then it's a lot harder for you to do, and in which case you need to start off with the way we all do when we're teaching, which is that what do you already know, like that that gathering of information, and then adjusting from there, and that's, we lose time every time we have to do that, but that is part of teaching. I do think one thing that we do forget that sometimes, that kids come in with some knowledge, that some kids will have used full robots before. Some kids at home might be playing on Minecraft from the age of 4, and have actually quite sophisticated understanding because of that on of different ideas. Like if you just using Minecraft in many ways is a really good building block to then add programming knowledge on top of, not just the coding within Minecraft, but you look at the kind of things they start doing with causation and the way that they go about building. A lot of students are then a little bit more prepared for programming later. So we've got to make sure that we are taking that time to work out where they're at and what they already know, and make it relevant. We also need to deal with a world in which students might be accessing technologies that they shouldn't be as well. So there is an aspect of cyber citizenship and safety that I think is really important that we do as early as possible.
Yeah. So what is then some of your favorite strategies that are being used in primary education at Haileybury, or that you have seen elsewhere, that you think that other teachers should know about?
Well, I might be a bit controversial. I used to be a very STEM oriented teacher. And I thought that I was very much constructivist in my approach. And since coming to Haileybury and seeing the explicit learning that's done at Haileybury close up, I suddenly realized that actually I'm not as constructivist as I thought I was. One of the approaches they have is I do, we do, I do, we do, you do. And coming from it from a STEM perspective, I'm like, oh, hang on, I've always done that. I just didn't really think of it as explicit learning. So one of the things that they do a lot here is the scaffolding of those technology skills, so that when students do then get to the bigger tasks and those like, you know, building video games in Scratch and all those kind of things, they're going in there with some tools to then build on. We're not sending them into the task blind. So that's it's a different, my pedagogy has shifted since I've come to Haileybury. Not that I would go about things differently, but now I'm a little bit more aware of the importance of going out there with technology and making sure that you are giving students that foundation to build on. So I've seen them do some amazing things here with, it's a very robot, not just robots, but they use a lot of the Ozzobots, B-bots, and then go up to the Lego as they grow up within the school. And I do like the physical computing for me, that ability to be hands-on and that. For me, that combination of programming and engineering really engages students, but also helps them see that when we're working with technology, we're producing solutions. It is a solution-oriented discipline. We don't just program for the fun of it for the most part. Some people might, but for the most part, we're solving a problem. And so building that kind of into the curriculum and making it really explicit has been really successful with the students. I really like that they also support it with outside of class learning. So they've got the digital curriculum. They've called it computer science, which I also love. That it's not like IT, it's computer science. They're being really explicit about like, this is not your PowerPoint session that you might do in English, which is, we went through a stage where thinking that was IT back in the 2000s, I think it was. Not us, but like certainly from a national curriculum perspective. So they're very explicit about this is what we want our students to have. And then they offer opportunities outside of the classroom for the students to develop and apply those, whether that's with Digitech Explorers or the first robotics or, you know, even the Fuse Cup in a way. That opportunity to see technology is not just something that happens between set periods of time, but it's something that like it is everywhere and something that you should have joy in learning, not just something that you do because the teacher tells you to.
Yep. As an educational leader, then, how do you change any misconceptions with teachers to do with technology integration?
I think for me, it's about language and having a common mindset. So we will always have disagreements if I come in and say, I want you to use technology. And you've got someone who's doing something very successfully without it going, well, why should I change? That will never be successful for most teachers. We're used to, firstly, we're used to being kings of our own castle, so to speak. We run our class. We're not used to, and it's something that we feel like we've got a lot of ownership over. And we're used to critical thinking. Like most teachers are very well educated and they want to know the whys. They won't just do something because they're told for the most part. When you make technology about learning and about students, then change happens because we're all here for that reason. I mean, otherwise we could work anywhere. Like we're in education because we genuinely want to help students learn better and give them better futures. So if you're just trying to implement technology for technology's sake, I don't think teachers will ever bite. If you are trying to implement technology to help students learn better and to give them better futures, then teachers will, for the most part, if you do it right, be supportive of that. And that's where, that's where I think we need to really work on our choice of what we implement and when, as well as the story we tell about it.
So what are some other ways that you support primary teachers in technology integration?
So we do, I actually, Haileybury's got a big team. So I have a digital learning leader for junior school. And I think that's really important. Paul Korn, he's amazing, and travels to every campus and spends time with them in the classroom, answering questions, modeling, and supporting them. So we really do. I think firstly, I think it's about making sure that support is there and accessible, because we didn't hire every teacher because they were meant to be like technology experts. Like that is part of being a teacher, is being able to adapt. I do think there's a professional responsibility, but it might not be your thing, and that's okay. That's why we have people to support. So I do think schools should invest in enough support to allow that to happen. So, so we do have someone who is there for junior school teachers. We make sure that they have access to the same technology that students have. So we're iPad one-to-one program in the junior school, and so all of our teachers get access to that. They get access to the same apps as the students do, so that they can put it into practice. We consult with them regularly about what problems they're having, so making sure that we can predict and preempt and look for better ways of doing things. And what we're really trying to do is make sure that technology in some ways is really used with a light hand. So it's there to support junior school pedagogy. It's there to help during the, particularly if you look at the explicit learning structure, like the you do stage, it's great for that kind of thing. So it's great for applying learning. So making sure that when we're implementing things, we're looking at that, making sure that wherever possible, I want it to work smoothly for teachers. You don't want to be in front of a prep class and be struggling with technology. Like you've got enough on your hands already. I've been there. And so everything that we implement is, has to be tested and has to be, we have to be sure that it's going to be successful for teachers. I think over time, we're looking at how we can broaden our approach. And so how can we ran a day, this staff day, where our heads of computer science for middle and junior school ran a session about using robots within the numeracy and literacy classrooms. So looking at making sure that we widen teachers' experiences with those tools outside of the set disciplines. And I'm really keen to continue to do those kind of collaborations where we make sure that we can see all the opportunities that technology can offer.
Okay. I think you mentioned before that you are secondary trained. I am too, actually. How does technology integration change in secondary education? Is it different or is it similar to in primary education?
I think we have to change the way we approach technology as students get older. I think that it is really hard to find that right balance. But as students get older, I believe that we need to allow them more opportunities to take risks, more ownership over their learning. So at Haileybury at year 5, we have a managed device program that continues until year 9. That's quite locked down because we do need to make sure that the technology we bring into the classrooms is an educational tool first. Then when they're in 10 to 12, they can continue using a managed device, but they can move instead to BYOD, and they then can be supported in learning how to manage it themselves. And I think one of the things that I notice, as particularly as someone who's taught from prep to 12, is that there's a real joy in a year 5 classroom. There's a real, love of learning for learning's sake. And the thing that I try and capture in those older years with technology, something I really want to see is the movement away from it being about assessment and much more about that lifelong learning when it comes to technology. And that's a difficult thing to do in a school system. But I do think that giving students access to the right tools at the right time, giving them opportunities to hear from, we've had people come in who are game developers, who design apps, who work in business, entrepreneurial program, giving students access to those voices so they can see technology as something that is part of their future and something that can help them with their studies, but it's more than that. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We discussed earlier, well, you discussed earlier, how the transition from early childhood to primary, is important. How is this any different, in secondary, from primary to secondary? I mean, how do you at Haileybury, continue on, of course, with those same strategies, throughout, school and secondary?
So at year 5, that's when we give them their managed devices. So I think it's important to shift them from iPads to laptops. They're very different ways of thinking. Anyone who's worked with a kid who's only used an iPad, their understanding of things like file management and how computers work behind the scenes can be really affected. And we support students at that stage with explicit instruction about your new device, as well as working with heads of department about the kind of assignments and the kind of things that they do in class to support that. So setting up really good habits early on is really, really important, not just in terms of just the way that they treat technology as a tool, but also their attitudes towards it as a whole. Then, I think it's really important to make sure that you have a strong age scope and sequence so that you're not covering the same things every year, so that students each year are building on their skills. Now we have attention compared to English or maths or any other curriculum in that it's always changing. And so having a scope and sequence that makes sense, that isn't repetitive, but is flexible enough to respond to the changes happening around us is really hard. The other challenge we have when we're looking at what they learn where is also that, how do we make sure that we're responsible and ethical in the types of tools that they use. So privacy and security is a really, really big thing there. One of my jobs, I don't like saying no. I'd prefer to find a way. But one of my jobs sometimes is to be a bit of a bonsai about what we use where. So sometimes I have to have difficult conversations about whether we implement a new tool that we already have something that does something similar, and when is it a good enough reason to add something to our ecosystem. I think that particularly when we've got 4 campuses, about 500 kids per year level, and 1,000 staff. So there's a lot of people who come in with new ideas, and you want to say yes to every single one. I think, though, that we have to be careful not to also, you can't do everything. You have to be concentrate on doing some things really well. So, like programming languages, like you could expose your students to 30 different programming languages, and you'll spend a lot of time talking about syntax and less time getting stuff done. So being mindful about your choices of what you implement and when. And sometimes that means going, that is nice and wouldn't mind doing it, but like it might pull away from what else we're trying to do. And so taking that big picture. It's a really challenging conversation, though.
Oh, I got no doubt, no doubt, Michelle. Then how, as an education leader, how often would you meet with other leaders at Haileybury to sort of get that same conception about technology integration, and work with them in what they are doing in the curriculum.
So my team, which has got the digital learning leader of senior school, middle school, junior school, library, Pangea, which is our virtual school, and myself meet. I hope I've not forgotten anyone. I apologize. We meet every Thursday, and that's the one time we're all on the same campus at the same time, because we do need to move around and visit the many different aspects of Haileybury.
Yep.
And that's where we can make sure we've got that vertical alignment, that, we know what's happening in junior school, we know what's happening in middle school, and we're not reinventing the wheel. Like, I don't want, like, if I have someone in my team developing a help file for middle school teachers, it should be useful for senior school as well. So that's where we have that throughput view. Then there's all of my team is represented on the heads of department meetings. So they sit with every single head of department, with all the different heads of department during those meetings, and share and listen. And sometimes that means that you find out that something's happening, and you're like, oh, we can make that better. We can add value here. And sometimes it's about, this is coming in and you need to know about it. On top of that, I sit on the educational leadership team, and so that's where we can have some of those bigger discussions about. So that's with the head of teaching and learning for middle school and senior school and junior school and whole school and Pangea and Northern Territory. So that's where I can add the technology view to that area. Then, so that's like the leadership side of things. But I do think that there's another aspect, which is how do you get that then pass through there, and how do you make sure that you're not leaving any areas behind? So that's kind of you have to have a top-down approach to leadership with technology, and a bottom-up approach, and make sure, because otherwise, particularly in a large school, you want to make sure that all of the support is getting through. But we're a very complex school. I've only kind of scratched the surface, to be honest.
In your time there, at Haileybury as a leader in digital technology, what outcomes have you seen, have been achieved there with the key strategies have been put in place there?
One of the things I really appreciate at Haileybury is firstly, like, the entrepreneurial view of the school it's a very old school. It can be very easy for older schools to get complacent and be very like, we've got excellent results. We don't need to do much more. And that's not what the approach is here. And I like that they let me take risks, and they let me look for different ways of doing things. So things like Pangea, that's not mine, but I've been able to add I've been a part of that journey, and looking at things like using the blended learning approach to support learning in a different way. And how do we build courses, and how do we design a LMS to support that specifically, and the kind of skills you need to track and support in order to do that. One of the things that I think is Haileybury's strength is that they then take those learnings and they move those into other areas. So even when something isn't like something I would necessarily say was amazingly successful, so like our bimodal classes, I do think like many others that that's a very complicated space to teach in. It requires special skills. But what we've learned from that, we've been able to then go, okay, well, we've now able to teach things like Latin fully online to on-campus students. So we've been able to even take some of the things that we've done that I and learn from it, and then apply it in different ways. And that's a very unusual school. That is always looking at what's next.
Just going on a bit further from that, Michelle, like you mentioned, some strengths of Haileybury. What do you perceive to be, some things that you could perhaps improve on in the future?
I think that Haileybury as a large school, that is our superpower, but it's also something that you have to be very aware of, because it can mean that it can make it more challenging to do change because of the sheer number of people involved. So I think that's something that, like, I wouldn't say that. I think it's something to be aware of in a large school. I've worked in both, and that you need to have good processes to do that, which I think we have. But certainly, I think that's something that, like, when you work at scale, you can't. It's a lot harder to drop everything now and just get something through very quickly. And I think that Haileybury manages it, but it's a lot easier when it's in a small school. And the same for that kind of startup approach of like, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. When you've got, something like 25 English classes attached to the same course, anything you do does affect a large number of students. So you have to go about things in different ways. And over the last few years, like I've found ways to do that, but it's not the same as in a small school. You just need to adapt to the context that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the reasons why I keep trying and reach out to people like yourself in these leadership roles to try and share your knowledge and expertise. I think it's very important that everybody sort of hears your message about what they can do. Haileybury is a K-12 school, so it's obviously a big school as well, as you said. One of the things, like, I would really just sort of like to help everybody with is, like, because we're not all in the same boat, as we know, in terms of where we teach. some might be, in a small primary school, isolated, in remote locations. What is some advice that you could possibly give to those people, in those situations that they can, might think, oh, we're only one school, one computer or one laptop, or, what advice could you give to those people, to sort of like, get started, in this process?
I've worked in a variety of different contexts, some big schools and some smaller schools. And one thing that I'm really aware of is that if you focus on what you're trying to achieve, there are different ways of achieving that. So I always try, and I tell my media students this as well, like to turn your weakness into a strength. So if you are a small school, then the benefit is that it tends to be more relational. Like you tend to have good relationships and know everyone in the community around you. So how can you turn that into a strength? What else is out there in the community that we could potentially use? So things like, doing a drive to collect iPads from, sorry, not iPads, old phones from people, to set up your own Google Cardboard setup, for example, or to power an idea that you've got. When I wanted to do sewable electronics on a fairly low budget, then I acquired the parts for it from AliExpress, direct from China. Sorry, anyone who's listening. I prefer to support Australian when I can, but if you don't have the budget for it, and otherwise kids aren't going to get the opportunity, it's 2 cents for an LED. So you can actually afford to, like, so long as you order it early, so you've got time for it to go through the through the ships, and you test it. I had one where the parts were mislabeled. Like, there's pros and cons. You have to be really careful. So I had to, manually go through and write plus and minus on all of the chips because they weren't labeled properly. That's what you get when you pay $1 per part. But it just means that you can make the money flow. Then you look for things like group projects. So how can you, like, rather than it being one-to-one, how can you design it so that either that the students have to work in a team, or can you have a setup where you might not have that many things, but you have different stations, and that students rotate through the curriculum a different way. So you put your learning in a blended model so that you're not trying to teach everyone all at once. The kids who are doing sewable electronics over there, we've only got 3 of them. Watch the videos and you start doing it. Those of you who are doing Scratch, because that's free, over here, you've got that. For those of you, because we've only got limited devices, you've got physical computing exercises, you're learning about binary, you go over here and you work on that. And after 3 weeks of you finishing your unit, then we rotate and we make the things. You can make things run off an oil rag. It's harder. It takes a lot of creativity, and that takes a lot of energy and intellectual energy, and schools shouldn't have to do this. But at the same time, there are ways of making things happen at the oil rag. I do not mean to minimize the experiences of anyone who's in a school with very little things. Like I'm throwing out things that I've done in the past when I faced different blockers, but like I fully acknowledge that I am in a place of privilege, and so and that if there's anything I can do, like if I can provide resources, reach out, like let me know, because it is genuinely difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, Michele, if you could give one key piece of advice to a teacher, whether it be in early childhood, primary, secondary, who kind of who just isn't too sure about this, what would you tell them?
I think that it's okay to not be sure. You look at things like AI coming in. No one was sure. Everyone who said there was an expert, unless they were actually involved in developing AI, no one really is an expert. Um, we're about to enter times which may be very uncertain, and modeling to your students that you can have core principles and ideas, whether it's about learning or whether it and ideas about how we approach learning when we're in times of uncertainty, how we approach ethics in times of uncertainty. That's okay. It's okay to say to your kids, I'm still learning this too because it's new, and I'm going to model how we learn. Um, I will say, my main rule is like I try not to bring something into the classroom unless I've tried it first. So while you model uncertainty, model that, but do try it first before you bring it into the classroom. Because as we all know, tech can be brilliant and can do amazing things, and then some days the projector doesn't work. Um, so so be a student yourself. Try it from a student's perspective. If you're using resources, if you're using Grok Academy, if you're using Scratch, try it yourself before you throw it at the kids as well. Because it will make you feel more confident, but also it will make you more understanding of what the effort required to learn is, and you won't have to think on your feet quite as much in the classroom.
Well, thank you so much, Michele, for that, fantastic advice and very helpful information. I'm sure my listeners would really appreciate it. And for me, again, I can't express my gratitude and thanks for your time this morning. So thank you so much, Michele.
Thank you for having me.
And if you would like to know more about how you can successfully integrate technology in your early childhood learning environment, why not enroll in one of our online PD for early childhood teachers, or become a member of our ICT in Education Teacher Academy for just $5.99 per month. Cancel anytime.